one thing people should know about Deep Purple, there was a lot of deception, lies and betrayal going on behind the scenes.
Blackmore became dissatisfied for one reason or another.
The hardest thing in this business is sincerity. Once you can fake that, you're laughing, you know.
You're out the band and you're not getting a penny. Goodbye.
Despite the numerous lineup upheavals during their career, Deep Purple have always set standards very few bands have been able to match. Whether it was the original lineup with lead singer Rod Evans, the classic Mark II with Ian Gillan, or the David Coverdale fronted version, Purple have always cemented themselves firmly as a true institution of British hard rock.
I just found them to be unique in their style. And I've always liked unique sounding music.
And they were very heavy, yet they were also slightly funky and also psychedelic. They almost threw the kitchen sink in at first.
And they were really good too. They weren't the kind of band that had played together since they were children, but they were all serious professionals.
They were pushing the boundaries of rock, playing longer songs, extended solos. There was this freedom there that they could suddenly let loose a bit, and I think that's why Deep Purple really worked.
Deep Purple it was just showbiz at its greatest. I went home thinking, I'm going to be in the music business. I don't know what, how or when, but that's what I've got to do.
The band originally started life as a session group for ex-Searchers drummer Chris Curtis. Curtis first recruited organist John Lord, at the time part of The Garden, a backing band for the Flowerpot Men, who were exploiting their big hit, Let's Go to San Francisco. Working alongside John Lord in the band was bassist Nick Simper.
It got to a point when we were all a bit dissatisfied with the Flowerpot Men music, because most of it was based on, you know, 4-part harmonies, Beach Boys type stuff. And then this Flowerpot Men tour had, only for the first night, because they got fired off the tour, they had a band called the Vanilla Fudge. And I went out and stood in the wings and watched the Vanilla Fudge, and we'd never seen anything like it. I mean, these guys were on another planet. I mean, just the way they played the way he played the bass and attacked it, the way the drummer was attacking the kit. John Lord had also seen the Vanilla Fudge, and it had the same effect on him. And shortly after that, he said to me, he said, if you had to give this up, would you be prepared to do it? I said, if it meant doing our own music, yeah, I think I would. He said, I might have a proposition for you. Ritchie Blackmore was also on board, but I'd always been a fan of Ritchie's. He was always my number one.
Ritchie Blackmore had spent the past 7 years flitting from band to band and working extensively as a session musician for legendary independent record producer Joe Meek. Blackmore had backed US rock giants Jerry Lee Lewis and Gene Vincent during their European tours and had already built a reputation as one of the most talented guitarists around.
Ritchie Blackmore had been on the circuit for a number of years with bands like The Outlaws, Screaming Lord, such. He'd also done session work, so he was a well-known personality in the 1960s.
Well, at that time Ritchie Blackmore was living in Germany, but he'd already built up a very good reputation through the 60s as one of the top guitarists, even though he hadn't had any hits or any kind of great commercial success like the other guys of the time, like Jeff Beck or Eric Clapton. But people within the music business knew that he was as good as anybody else.
It's from that reputation that, like Paice went on to form Zeppelin, that sort of Blackmore was in prime position to sort of not launch Deep Purple per se, but sort of be a major part of the group's makeup, and obviously his sort of talent and the mystique of his character sort of pushed him to the fore really of the band as their sort of status developed.
He's a very good guitarist. A little mad, of course. Well, completely barking. But, you know, that's genius for you.
Just as things had started to get off the ground, Curtis mysteriously drifted out of the situation, leaving the trio of Blackmore, Lord and Simper to set up home in a disused barn in Hertfordshire, where they worked on song ideas and auditioning drummers and singers.
Somebody came up with a bright idea of putting an ad in the Melody Maker. So we put this advert in, really pretentious, you know, incredible band seeks incredible singer, own country mansion, you know, equipment, finance, cars, the lot, you know, it was a whole load of hokum. And the phone just exploded. I mean, everybody out there just phoned us up. It didn't stop. And it was a totally hopeless thing because some of them were probably damn good, but there were so many of them, you only had time to sort of give them a couple of songs. And then this guy called Rod Evans turned up, and Ritchie Blackmore remembered him from a gig in Germany. He'd seen him, and he said, yeah, that guy's pretty good. And consequently, we tended to give him a little bit more time. But what really made it was the fact that he said, I've got an idea for the Beatles' Help, he said, but not the way they do it. He said, I've got an idea for doing it like a ballad. And he sat down and started doing the Beatles' Help the way we recorded it on the first album, and it just blew us all away, you know. And we thought, this guy, he's got ideas, he can do something different. And that was it. He got the job, above all these sort of hundreds of others that had auditioned. And as it happened, his band had an excellent drummer in the shape of Ian Paice.
Having settled on Ian Paice and Rod Evans, Deep Purple's first album, Shades of Deep Purple, was recorded in 3 days, and the band had instant success when the debut single, Hush, reached number 4 in the American charts.
Hush had something about it, right from the off. I felt, I'm not sure about the others, but I think we all felt that there was something a bit special about it. There was a version out by Joe South, there was a version out by a guy called Chris Ife. And we'd only heard it like in backgrounds, like if you're in a disco or you're in a nightclub and you hear this thing and you think, that's a good tune, that's a good one. And a friend of mine who was working, a guy called Roddy Freeman, who was a singer with the Ronnie Smith band, which also had Ashley Holt in its membership and Rick Wakeman. They did it on stage, and I happened to mention it to Rod Freeman, and he said, I could come round and teach you the song. And he actually came round with his guitar and he wrote the lyrics out and he said, this is how it goes. And we actually learnt the song off Rod Freeman without ever really hearing the record, which I think made it a little bit different. I mean, we didn't know in the American market that someone could have a hit and someone would do the same song maybe 6 months, a year later and have a hit all over again, because that didn't tend to happen in England, but it happened in America big time for us. So we were quite pleased about it. I was quite pleased with the way the bass line turned out, and the vocals were a little bit shaky. Me and Rod and John doing our best. But it had that little bit of magic that's very hard to define.
She broke my heart, but I love her just the same. Now hush, hush. Lord, I heard her calling my name. Now hush, hush. I need her loving and I'm not to blame. In the morning, I'm thinking I need him. Oh, I need him.
I started a long while ago in the R&B 60s in England, and that's where I sort of learnt my chops and everything, and a lot of those things that I learnt they've all been useful along the way, but I've really felt in Purple it was either totally one thing, which is soloing like a mad mother, or being a rhythm guitarist with keyboard shaped. and that was fine for Purple. It was a big part of the sound.
If you look at probably the way Purple was set up, you know, sort of management sort of involved, and you know, they're a new band and they're going to need something that's going to push them to the fore, and there's nothing easier to push you to the fore than to cover something that's already been popular, because obviously an audience is perhaps less receptive to brand new ideas than they are of hearing something that they can instantly recognise, even if it's not the same as what has preceded it.
The problem was that it was almost too soon, and like other bands in the past subsequently have found, it's all very well having a hit single almost off the bat, but somehow it becomes a millstone round your neck. And the pressure was on for Purple to try and follow it up with something else. They did a lot of covers on their first 3 albums.
I remember going to parties where the first 3 albums would occasionally be stuck on, and I'd be like, who's that? Usually the covers that would, you know, who the hell's doing the Beatles' Help? You know, oh, it's Deep Purple. Right, okay.
Well, I mean, they were covering Neil Diamond songs, for Christ's sake. I mean, the thought of Deep Purple Mark II, you know, the group we all knew and loved, right, covering Neil Diamond is ridiculous, isn't it? You know, it's like the Beatles covering Sweet or something, or covering Cloda Rogers, for Christ's sake.
If Deep Purple had appeared now as a band, they'd have been dropped after probably their second album, because, you know, it was directionless to a certain extent.
Recording was always a problem. We were always short of material, purely because of our schedule, and the fact that we were always being chased by Tetragrammaton for material. We never had the luxury that most bands do now of saying, hang on fellas, we want a little bit of downtime to just think about stuff and try and be creative. We didn't have that luxury.
To get the best out of a group, you've got to give them a year for each LP, I would think, for an actual progression without forcing it. And that really bugs me, actually, going to the studio. Right, we've got to turn out an LP, boys. You know, here we go, blah, blah, blah. I've got to write a song today, you know. It's just ridiculous.
With 3 albums in less than a year, the band continued to have hit records in the US. But back home, it was a different story.
And of course, when Hush came out in this country, nobody bothered. Nobody promoted us. I did hear that people were told not to work on that one because the Beatles had got a new single coming out, so give everything to the new Beatles single. People were going in the shops trying to buy Deep Purple, they couldn't buy us.
You remember, this is 1968, the Beatles were still going and they're on the same label. So if you're EMI, you're going to put most of your backing behind bands like the Beatles and not a new band without a track record. So, you know, Deep Purple was up against it really when you think about it in those days.
We were selling records all around the world. We had top 10 hits worldwide. None of this ever got reported in England. This is because we didn't have the right people doing our publicity. They didn't have a clue. I mean, they were paying people that are supposed to do this job, but they didn't do the job. And consequently, we were all tearing our hair out saying, why aren't people capitalising on this? We would have meetings where these things would be thrashed out. Yeah, let's talk to so-and-so agency, let's talk to so-and-so for press and publicity. And when it came to it, there wasn't solidarity within the band. We were kind of desperately looking for another hit record, and I think that's where we went wrong, because there was always pressure. You've got to have this hit record. I don't think we needed a hit record. You know, things were changing. You know, Led Zeppelin had started. They'd come over to America. They were touring the same venues we were. Vanilla Fudge didn't have hit records any longer, but these guys, they had the acts that were selling out. There was no reason why we couldn't do the same. We just needed time and to get rid of that pressure, and also being constantly told that you're in debt. It's not much fun when you've shifted millions and millions of records around the world. And we were still on basic wages. And it came to a head one day when I said to John Coletta, I said, look John, I said, you know, I keep reading that we're one of the biggest acts in the world. You know, we're selling out here, there and everywhere. We've sold all these records. I said, surely we can reap some of the benefits of this now. He said, well, what do you want? I said, well, I'd like to buy a new car. So I've been buying the same, I've been driving the same old Jaguar for 5 years. He said, what would you like? I said, I want a new Jaguar. Order one up, he said, you can have it. I said, I'd also like to pay off the mortgage on my parents' house. He said, phone them up, tell them it's done. I did all that. Had egg on my face, because shortly after that, other plans were made for my future, and I was moved sideways out of the band.
It was clear that something had to be done, and in 1969, Blackmore, Lord and Paice decided to replace Evans and Simper.
Well, Nicky wasn't constructive, he didn't have any ideas, and he was an average bass player, so he had to go. Rod just wanted to go to America and live in America, and he's doing very well. He always does very well. Rod's a very nice guy. Well, so Nicky was, but he got very bitter.
Definitely the lack of success in the UK was putting pressure on the band and causing friction within the band. And I think also the diversity of musical ideas within the band were probably causing friction as well. And I believe behind management's back that the band themselves decided to get rid of Rod Evans.
Particularly Ritchie Blackmore had this sort of vision, an idea of the direction he wanted the band to go in. And certainly as far as Rod Evans, the vocalist, was concerned, didn't really feel that his voice was big enough and powerful enough to take the band into that direction. So I never to this day really understand why they wanted to get rid of Nick Simper, because if you listen to the stuff that Nick Simper did after he left with his own band Warhorse, it was very, very similar in style and feel to really what Deep Purple did after he'd left.
We were due to record a song called Hallelujah, and Rod Evans was still in America arranging his marriage. And they're telling me that we're going in the studio, and I said, well, how can we go in the studio, if we haven't got Rod with us? And John said, well, we know the keys and everything, so we can put backtracks down, and then Rod will come over and put his vocal on. So I swallowed that, and apparently I'm told by sources close to the band, who, mainly road crew, the plan was we were going to record in the morning, doing backtrack. I was told that we couldn't have the studio in the afternoon, we could only have it morning and evening. The plan was to bring Ian Gillan in the afternoon to learn the vocal and possibly put it on. And then when I turned up in the evening, I was going to be told what was going down, that we were getting a new singer in. And apparently when the roadie went round to pick up Ian Gillan, Roger Glover happened to be there, so he came along for the ride. And of course my bass was still at the studio where I'd left it in the morning waiting for the evening session, so he picked up my bass, and so I can only conclude that that's how it was done.
I believe Purple handed the switch from Mark I to Mark II dreadfully. They went out and searched for a new vocalist and bassist without telling the guys in the band that they were going to move on. So you have this ridiculous situation, and it could only have happened then. It couldn't happen now because there's so many media outlets. But back then, Ian Gillan on vocals and Roger Glover on bass were hired by Deep Purple, while at the same time they were working with those two on ideas for the next album. They were touring with Rod Evans and Nick Simper, who only found out apparently about the fact that they'd been replaced through the musician's grapevine.
Roger, we found him in the gutter. No, Roger, poor old Roger. He turned up to the session to do one number we did. He was their bass player. We weren't originally going to take him until Paice said, he's a good bass player, let's keep him. So I said, okay.
I was actually going out of the door that evening to get in the car to go to the studio when the phone rang, and I went back to answer it, and it was John Lord. And he said, bad news. I said, what's that? He said, the session is off tonight. I said, off? Why is that then? He said, they got problems with the 4-track machine, it's playing up. I said, anything we can do with the 2-track machine? Oh, he said, that's playing up as well. I can remember his exact words, even though it was a long time ago. And he said, so you got a night off? So I said, oh good, I'll take my girlfriend to the pictures, fine, do with the night off. So, of course, I never smelt a rat, I never suspected a thing. And the word crept out, and it got to a stage where everybody knew that Rod Evans and myself were out of Deep Purple. The only ones that didn't know were me and Rod Evans. I mean, can you believe that? So I called up Tetragrammaton in America. Of course, they were pretty shocked to have me on the line. And I said, I thought I'll play it cool. I said, what's going on with this what's the plans for this single we're doing, Hallelujah? And they said, yeah, we got a copy of Hallelujah, but you're not on it. Can you imagine how I felt? We went off to play somewhere in Wales. And I thought, if I tell Rod Evans before the gig, he's probably just going to hit someone with an axe or something. He'll just go nuts. And I kept really cool. I thought, you know, I mean, really, I wanted to just get hold of somebody and lay them out. But I thought, no, keep it cool, protect your own interests, because they can't just do this and get away with it. You know, there's money at stake here. But it ended up so it was just Rod and I going back from Wales in the car. We dropped the others off at various places. And I told him, and he went absolutely nuts, you know. He said, I knew something was going on. He said, I'm going to kill those guys. He said, we'll dump this car in the canal. And I said, don't be silly, it's our car. We can't dump the car in the canal. He was just so mad, you know, to get kind of revenge. So he said, right, let's go and see John Coletta. So we drove down to Brighton to John Coletta's house. And I can imagine John Coletta wasn't too thrilled to see us on the doorstep. You know, his jaw just sort of sagged. And he said, I said, the game's up, John. I said, we know. And he just said, well, you better come in. So I phoned up John Lord and, no, he phoned up John Lord, that's right, and he said, they know. He said, Nick and Rod are here, he said, and they know. And he said, I'll put you on to him, you know. And I just said, what's it all about, John? What's the story? Oh, I can't tell you now, he said. It's a little bit me, and it's a little bit Ritchie, and it's a little bit Ian. He said, you must come round to dinner and I'll explain everything. And I never heard from him again. So that's the attitude of people that, you know, you ultimately turn into millionaires. It's quite wonderful, isn't it?
The first project with the two new members was John Lord's ambitious Concerto for Group and Orchestra.
Having been this rather trivial pop band with Hush and Kentucky Woman, the idea of performing at the Albert Hall with an orchestra would kind of lift them up into towards the level that groups like, say, the Nice, who went on to become Emerson, Lake and Palmer, were becoming, so that people would take notice of them and take them more seriously.
No good saying you're a serious musician and everybody starts laughing at you, you know. You're right. It's, you know, if you do what you do to the best of your ability, then the audience puts you into a category. You don't. They say, well, these are now a heavy rock band, this is a nice folk band. You don't say that.
It gave the band a lot of publicity because no one had really done that before. I mean, you know, Metallica and everybody and their dog does it now, but back then it was a first. So suddenly, Mark II is very much in the UK public's eye.
Well, Concerto for Group and Orchestra, it was a success as far as putting Deep Purple on the map. It's become apparent in recent years that Ritchie Blackmore wasn't too happy about doing it in the first place. It was really, you know, John Lord's brainchild and John Lord's baby.
I think the rest of the band were they were almost stunned, and they were scared that it was sort of going to take them out of the rock arena, the kind of hard rock arena, into a sort of more kind of almost straight, you know, conservative classical music thing.
Some of John's orchestral writing was a little bit immature.
John Lord wrote the concerto with 3 movements in the accepted fashion, But in truth, there was never really a fusion between the band and the orchestra.
I think too many people took it too seriously. It was the first of its kind, really, to combine an orchestra with a rock band, and some critics, particularly on the classical side of music, were a little pompous and didn't give it the credit it deserved.
Concerto for group and orchestra has kind of like secured its place in the great scheme of things as far as rock music goes, but to be honest with you, I find it heavy going. And quite unremarkable, I have to say. I guess you had to have been there.
I think they got an acknowledgement from certain sections of the media and a certain type of fan that they were prepared to try things. So it gained them a certain respect, whilst also turned them into a laughing stock. And it was the respect angle which ultimately really was the more important.
There's a mixed reaction, some people declaring it a wonderful success, others questioning whether it was sort of really Purple's, whether it was their arena really, whether they should be dabbling in this sort of kind of quasi rock classical mode.
One reason why the concert was perhaps not as successful as it could have been is because the orchestra were not particularly impressed by a rock group and were perhaps not giving it their unbridled enthusiasm. Although apparently conductor Michael Arnold impressed on them that this was a serious professional engagement.
How can I see when the light is gone out? How can I hear when you speak so silently? More than enough is never too much. Hold out a hand, I'm so out of touch.
If you watch the footage of that performance, I think ultimately it did work.
Well, it worked for me. I think it probably got quite a slagging in the press, as in terms of how dare they, consider playing with, blah blah blah.
The success of Concerto caused friction within the band. Ritchie Blackmore in particular was determined the band would not be labelled as a novelty act. He was adamant that the next studio album should be an all-out assault on the eardrums. As Blackmore said to others, if it's not dramatic or exciting, it has no place on this album. The results spoke for themselves. Deep Purple in Rock was released in the summer of 1970.
In rock was something that I got fed up with playing with classical orchestras, and I thought, well, this is my turn. I'm the rock kind of thing, So John was into more classical. I said, well, you've done that, I'll do the rock. Whatever turns out the best, we'll carry on with. And I said, if this fails, this record, then I'll play with orchestras the rest of my life.
You don't think it failed?
Pardon?
You don't think it failed? In rock?
Well, hardly.
No, I understand.
Deep Purple in Rock was everything that Blackmore had envisaged and more. It would remain in the UK charts for over a year. Deep Purple had finally found its niche with its hard-driving, heavy, thunderous, powerful rock.
If Hush, the single, made people aware that a band called Deep Purple existed, then In Rock was the album that put Purple on the map as far as rock music was concerned. I mean, it opens with Speed King, which is proto-thrash metal.
running out, I'm running, rocking to the east and west. Hard-headed woman and a soft-hearted man, caught the trouble since it all began. Took a little rice, took a little beans, rock and roll down in New Orleans. I'm a
Speaking was a fantastic track to open with, and it was a track that Deep Purple had been playing for some months beforehand live, and I believe it was called Kneel and Pray, and they'd worked on the lyrics, played it live many times, and by the time they got to the studio had reworked the whole song.
You knew Purple had changed, and they kind of consolidated what they were doing. They were obviously happy with what they do, and they'd finally found a focus.
Speed King rips in at full throttle with Ritchie Blackmore tearing between the speakers on a sustained flurry of notes that's right on the edge of feedback.
The opening of Speed King, when you have that crashing, wailing guitar that no British guitarist had ever done before. We had Jimi Hendrix doing it to us in a certain way in the sort of late 60s. But to have this coming crashing in, and it's absolutely devastating. And if you have it loud enough, you can actually annoy the neighbours 2 or 3 streets away.
Balls to the wall, hard rock. Just everything is in there. And you know when you listen to that track that if the rest of the album's going to be anything like it, you're onto a winner. And they were.
Yeah, it was a good LP. It was very, everything was about 20, everything was about 1,000 miles an hour. It was good LP, that. Objectively speaking, I think so. Everything on there was good. I don't think there was one track I really hated.
There was no composition on the Purple things. There were basic ideas when you went into the studio. Maybe the magic with Purple in the old days was it was so spontaneous, because when we got it on tape, it was the first time we ever played it. So maybe that was the magic then. But by the same token, we often came across things which we enjoyed playing, but if you took it out of context of an album, you'd say it was dire, you wouldn't listen to it. In the context of a 35, 40-minute album, it was right.
To get it onto tape, pain in the fucking arse. That's why I don't like recording too much.
You don't?
No. It's too clinical, again. A lot of people love it because they can edit their music, put it together and make it nice, but when they get on stage, they're lost. Well, my type of way of thinking is the opposite. I love to have that freedom, just going on stage and playing whatever I want to play at the time. I mean, I'll play the numbers which I'm supposed to play, but the in-between parts, when I'm feeling good, I'll be away and play something completely off the wall I've never ever played in my life.
I love working with people who are going to push me, because I get a lot of energy. For example, over Ritchie. I mean, Ritchie, when he's playing on stage, tries to blast everyone off the stage.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's a kind of competition. One of the things Ritchie said to me when I joined Deep Purple, he said, you've got to bear this in mind. He said, I don't mean it badly, he said, but I'm going to try and blow you off stage every night. I said, all right, great. I said, well, in that case, I'm going to try and do the same to you. He said, yeah, great. He said, in that way, we'll have a good band.
Purple could play 6, 7, 8, 10-minute piece of music. And the fact that it was played with a certain amount of skill and talent and a lot of bollocks, made it happen.
On stage we have a lot of intense excitement. It's like adrenaline, kind of nervous presence. Right. People either love it or they get scared of it. You know? It's a bit too, you know. Right. That's why we have a lot of people that maybe hate us, because we're so demanding. You don't like the music, you've got to turn it off. What we put down, you just can't talk over our music. Right. And we don't want anybody talking over it, so they either say nothing or they leave. And that's why we get, for instance, no radio play in England, because the housewives can't do their dusting when we're playing on the radio. It probably interferes with the hoover or something. I don't want to. Smoke was one of my favourite tracks. Mary Long was one of my favourite tracks. Machine Head's good. What else? Speaking was... Into the Fire was very good, I thought. ChildInTime was good. Purely from the vocal point of view, it was very, very different. In Rock was good, but it was a good period, but we were coming up, you know what I mean?
In Rock is one of the great albums. Not by Purple, not just by Purple, by anybody. Brilliantly produced. The production holds up today. I don't think you can go in the studio, re-record In Rock and do it any better. It wouldn't sound as good. The zeitgeist, if you want, the serendipity of the occasion, the whole thing made it into an absolutely cataclysmic album. Exactly what Mark II needed.
And I think it really sort of made a statement at the time that this is the future of rock music, which it was for some years, not just with Purple, but with a lot of the other bands that sort of categorised within the same genre.
Purple weren't the only band playing this kind of music, but they were certainly one of the best. And most of the tracks on that album just seemed to hit an audience that wanted that kind of music.
I remember the first time I heard it, it just blew me away. It just absolutely blew me. ChildInTime, Speed King. I mean, ChildInTime alone is just, it's a masterpiece.
Sweet child in time, you'll see the line that's drawn between the good and the bad. See the blind man, yeah, he's shooting at the world. Bullets.
I think ChildInTime is one of the all-time classics.
It kind of illustrated all the elements of what was great about Purple.
The mood of it starts off very simply.
I think that you can clearly hear John Lord's kind of symphonic, classical rock concepts at work here.
I mean, if anything that Purple did could be remotely termed as prog rock, then maybe ChildInTime was it. But I mean, it's just this epic rock track with Gillan singing out of his skin. This is, you know, the new guy really. And the band just come alive.
Tremendous piece of epic musicianship, grandiose ideas. I'm still not sure what the lyrics mean. I'm not sure they know. Some of it actually, has to be said, was ripped off, and I use the term advisedly, from an American band called It's a Beautiful Day. They had a song called Bombay Calling, which you listen to it, and its beginning is exactly like ChildInTime. And then you look at the dates, and that came out about a year before ChildInTime, and in rock. And I did tackle John Lord about that, and he said, yeah, we did get the idea. That's where we took the idea for. Yep, we toured together. At the time he was dating the female vocalist in the band as well, and that's where they got the idea. He openly says that, but he also reckons It's a Beautiful Day took some ideas from Purple, but that's another story. But ChildInTime is a magnificent piece of music, and how Ian Gillan remains almost in complete control of his voice whilst going completely insane is remarkable.
I wanna hear you sing.
His vocal delivery was exactly what Purple had wanted, which is why they brought him into the band.
What a range he had, a fantastic range. He could go really high.
The passion in Ian Gillan's voice when he reaches the crescendo of the 3 screams that he does, and he takes it up, and he takes it up, and he takes it up. Now, I've tried to do that song, and we had to compromise and just do the 2 screams.
Gillan's vocals are just incredible, especially at that time. I mean, I still think he's one of the few vocalists that, you know, still has got some strength in his voice when he performs live. But back then it was frightening.
He's got such powerful lungs. He really can let rip, and he's among the most powerful singers rock music has ever known. But he has such a soulful and melodic voice as well. He could handle all sorts of material. But what Purple really wanted at the time, we want a heavy vocalist who understands melody, and they got it with Ian Gillan. In Roger Glover, they got in a bassist who was unfussy, but very good technically. Also, again, contributed nicely and impressively to songwriting.
He'd been in a band where really they didn't write much. It was just a pop band. He's suddenly in a band where he's playing a riff, he's come up with an idea, and the rest of the band are feeding off it, and they're using those ideas.
When rock bands achieve greatness, you know, it's because everything falls into place at the right time. It's like Led Zeppelin, those 4 people happening to get together. That, you know, only those 4 people could probably have done that with Led Zeppelin. With Deep Purple, get rid of those 2 guys, 2 new guys come in, bang, all falls into place, they're up and running.
As something of an afterthought during a drunken recording session, the band recorded an extra track for a proposed single, but considered it to be nothing more than a throwaway song. The management felt otherwise and were convinced it could be a hit. They were proved right when Black Knight stormed up the UK charts, reaching number 2.
At the time, they were touring the UK extensively, and I remember there was a riot, I think, in Glasgow, right, the same week that they were on Top of the Pops doing Black Knight, and so it all seemed to Purple Mania hits England, only one big crash, didn't it, right? And suddenly they were, you know, they were Top of the Pops. They were, you know, on everybody's TV. And they were an unusual group for Top of the Pops too, because you didn't normally get people with waist length hair on Top of the Pops.
Black Knight is one of the most instantly recognisable Mark II songs, one of the most instantly recognisable Deep Purple songs. Actually, let's be honest, one of the most instantly recognisable hard rock songs of all time. You know exactly what you're going to get as soon as you hear the introduction. It sticks in your mind. It's got a very good melody. It brought together the poppier end of Purple, and by that I mean their ability to write a very straightforward song, verse, chorus, guitar break, with the very heavy element that's always there. In fact, to some extent it clashes, because I've always felt what makes it work is almost a dissatisfaction between the heavy and the pop clash, and a satisfaction of the way they gel together. And you listen to the song and it sounds very restive, very febrile. It never really sits back and feels comfortable.
What this showed was that, you know, a lot of rock bands can make a lot of noise. Few rock bands can make a lot of noise and put it into the kind of package that makes it appealing to a lot of people. And Deep Purple had a wonderful ear for melody. A lot of that really from the way Ritchie Blackmore hears music, and the people around him, you know, wanted to play that music.
With demand for the group escalating, they struggled to split their time between performing to ever-growing audiences and recording a follow-up album. On stage, the band mixed tracks from In Rock with classics from earlier lineups such as Mandrake Route.
Initially they were playing a lot of the older songs that the first lineup had played live, but they were pushing, even extending them even further by now songs like Ring That Neck and Mandrake Root, they were stretching out to half an hour on stage.
They were of an era when audiences expected musicians to be virtuosos. It became passé during the second half of the 70s because punk blew all that kind of thing away, right? But Ritchie was a virtuoso guitarist who could solo for hours, right? And so was John Lord. And audiences expected that. And the songs on In Rock gave them the opportunity to stretch out on these kinds of solos.
And you can only do that if you're very comfortable, certainly at the kind of level of musical expertise that they were performing. You can only do that if you're incredibly comfortable in your own talent and everybody around you.
Deep Purple had that X factor which separates all the great bands. It wasn't just about 5 individuals working to a maximum and therefore you had Deep Purple. You had 5 individuals working to a maximum plus something, because there was the X factor involved and it made them so special on stage.
Ritchie Blackmore with his guitar swinging it round his bloody head, and it was like, yeah, this is good. And they were just stunning. I think Ritchie Blackmore, he smashed the guitar, he set fire to the guitar, the strobe lights, the wall of Marshalls.
Though I suspect that the guitars he smashed were always either old ones or ones he didn't really want, because he loved his guitars, did Ritchie. And on another occasion I saw them at the Plumpton Rock Festival when what became Reading was done on Plumpton Racecourse south of London on the way to Brighton. He set fire to the Marshall stack behind him. I think he got some lighter fuel or something like that, poured it on and match. Well, this did not go down well with the promoters, of course, but it got the headlines for Deep Purple. You know, it looked very spectacular. The audience loved it, of course.
Eventually, Fireball, the follow-up to In Rock, was released to mixed reception amongst the band and critics alike. Ian Gillan thought it was a natural progression from In Rock and remains to this day his favourite Purple album. However, Blackmore led the criticisms, claiming it was not as focused and direct.
This is the border of Devon and Cornwall, about 6 hours' drive from London. It's the middle of winter, so there's not a tourist to be seen and the beaches and hills look deserted. But for the last fortnight, these hills have been shaken by the sound of one of England's top groups, Deep Purple.
Fireball, that was a bit of a disaster because it was like thrown together in a studio. We had no time, managerial pressure. You've got to play here, there, and you've got to make an LP. And then you're back to Australia, you're back to here. I got kind of bitter about that. I thought, if you want an LP, you've got to give us time. Right. And they wouldn't. So I got a little bit bitter there, and I just threw ideas to the rest of the group that I thought up on the spur of the moment. I had nothing in my head.
Well, when Fireball came out, most of the band were quite quick to dismiss it as not being as good as In Rock. And I think they did that because it probably didn't appear to be as focused. It wasn't as direct, it wasn't as hard-hitting. There was a lot of different ideas. Ian Gillan was the only one in the band that really praised it highly, and to this day I think he still says it's his favourite Purple album. I tend to agree with Ian Gillan on that because I think it was the most adventurous album the band ever did.
Commercially, Fireball didn't do the sales that Deep Purple and Rock did.
There was quite a lot of pressure on the band to deliver after the hugely successful Deep Purple In Rock.
To many people it was a bit of a disappointment coming after In Rock.
Personally, I think it's a fantastic album. It's one of my all-time favourites.
There were some good songs on there. It was a lot more diverse. It wasn't as focused as In Rock. But I thought it was a fine album.
The critics absolutely loved it. Now, I guess to a certain extent everybody was just getting the idea of Deep Purple. There was a lot of people interested in it, so therefore the critics were enjoying and understood what was going on.
The Mule, which came off Fireball, was a great showcase for Ian Paice, and he used it for quite some years.
Every song is a good showcase for Ian Paice.
I remember going and seeing them with Gillan at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I spent the whole night watching Ian Paice because he was just, that particular night, he was just brilliant.
This kind of drumming had never been done. No one had actually sort of taken drum to sort of such high octane, sort of driven rock, and no other drummers at the time had the skills, the physical skills, to play like Ian Paice. I believe this is probably the first time that he had two bass drums, and so it sounded like there were two drummers, and this is the thing that scared lots of other drummers. Also, what's significant, I think, is that Ian Paice had been listening to other forms of music, especially jazz drummers, people like Buddy Rich, very complex jazz drummers, and taking and assimilating bits and pieces from unusual sources and then putting them into a rock context, which was very, very successful and very exciting.
By the end of 1971, Deep Purple's popularity was still growing, and they finished off a year of touring with a trip to Switzerland to record the next album. The recording session for what became Machine Head would go down in Purple folklore as one of the most talked about events ever. The casino they were due to record in was burnt down on the eve of starting the album, with the group ending up at the Grand Hotel to record. They immortalized the story in what was to become one of the most famous rock songs of all time, Smoke on the Water.
Smoke on the Water's certainly an all-time classic, you know, along with Stairway to Heaven from Zeppelin and Radar Love from Golden Earring. You know, can you name any other songs that are played more on American radio today? I doubt it.
A great sort of classic rock riff that all would-be budding guitarists, when they go into a guitar shop, they want to play that song.
Probably one of the all-time classic riffs ever invented.
Smoke on the Water is probably one of the best riffs ever written. And it works purely because of its simplicity.
When I first heard it, obviously the riff is very powerful. The riff is very instant, and that's the key to it. It's that simplicity. It's a riff you'll never get out of your head. As Ritchie Blackmore's alluded to in years gone by, it's really their equivalent to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Those opening riffs, those opening notes, which everybody knows. It's a parallel in classical and rock terms in that respect. It's an instantly recognisable piece.
Not only did Machine Head include Purple's most successful song ever, but the whole album was littered with classic tracks that would become the mainstay of a live show.
It was a great LP, I thought. And we had ideas, Ian, Gillan, himself and Roger. It began to become a trio writing then. Right. John started stepping back, and Ian just gives percussive ideas. And so it was a trio by Machine Head.
Everything again is just all fallen into place. It was the right time, the right place to record the album, you know, the right group of songs. It just works. You listen to it as an album, and it's, you know, I mean, it's always held up as the best, often the best Deep Purple album, and certainly the best Mark II album.
I think it's also people's maybe views on it are slightly clouded by the fact that so many of those songs became the staple part of the live show. So I think people, because they're from that album, always consider that album to be a much better album.
But it's not the album the band wanted to make. That's the strange thing about it. The band set out to do a double album. Ended up with them recording Smoke on the Water. That's the positive side, but not ever recording the live album, which would have made Machine Head maybe something slightly different.
As I recall, it was not often all five of them were actually recording together. one faction of the band would stay up at night and drink, and then they'd be late in the morning, and another faction of the band would go to bed early and they'd be there in the morning, and they'd get fed up because the other ones hadn't turned up. And then when the ones eventually turned up, the ones that had been in the studio for a while were fed up of being there all day, so they wanted to go home or go and have their lunch or their dinner, evening meal. So I think that the kind of solidity of the band was starting to fall apart then.
Made in Japan was recorded in the summer of 1972, and it caught Deep Purple at the height of their career in the Mark II lineup.
Made in Japan is, in my opinion, the greatest live album of all time.
It was a band saying, this is us live. This is not just us performing the songs from the record.
I think in the list of classic live albums, Made in Japan is definitely up there.
Made in Japan is probably as good as live rock gets.
If I was stuck on a desert island and I had to pick 10 albums, Made in Japan would be right up there with it.
The album set the template for other live albums in the 1970s.
It's a band that are at the height of their powers, the height of their creativity.
That was showcasing like these people at the pinnacle of their musicianship.
There were many other bands at the time that were good live acts, but if you went to a Purple show around this time, which I did, yeah, you'd be blown away. You would come away after sort of 2 hours with thinking, well, that's the best show I've ever heard and seen.
Made in Japan, as much as any other album that had gone previously or was to come after, established Deep Purple as the greatest band of all time.
I found it difficult to listen to the studio albums after I'd been listening to Made in Japan. It was such a great energy. And I think as with a lot of Deep Purple songs, they translate live because of the sheer energy that goes in from all the members.
It was kind of the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle. It's like, yeah, this is a really great jamming band, not afraid of taking risks, obviously having great fun with a lot of it. I think they managed to explore kind of most of what they were about, which you can't do in a studio, in all fairness.
From the outside, everything looked rosy. Sold out concerts around the globe, albums being sold by the millions. But behind the facade, personal relationships in the band were at an all-time low. The major frictions were between Ian Gillan and Ritchie Blackmore, a classic case of chalk and cheese.
Well, I mean, Deep Purple aren't unique in being a band that you know, have had friction between band members and that has caused band members to either leave or be sacked. When you work in such close proximity with people and you pretty much live out of each other's pockets day in, day out, because you're on the road for so long, and when you're not on the road you're probably in the studio together, then any kind of little tension is magnified and normally probably seems a lot worse than perhaps it is.
Firstly, at this point, Deep Purple would become hugely successful. Success breeds demand. Demand breeds more work. More work means you're spending more time together. Generally, when you spend more time together, you get on each other's nerves. That's one reason, I think, why relationships started to go sour. The other one, the key relationship that obviously soured, which everyone talked about, was the one between the singer and the guitarist.
There's a clash of personality, clash of egos, clash of temperament between the two of them. I think there's a grudging respect between them, but also an understanding that they can't ever really work together for that long before things break down completely.
When bands record an album and the vocalist waits for the band to leave the studio before he goes in to do his vocals, there's a good chance there's something going wrong. There's a very good chance there's something up with this band. And that's what it was like for Who Do We Think We Are?